Now, Apple does this all the time. They create a niche product and they strategically do not let it overshadow any of their other products that they sell. For example, the Pro iPads, the iPad Pros with the M chips, are very capable of running full-on Mac OS. But Apple will not let them run Mac OS because then that would overshadow on the sales of the MacBook Airs. The second case in point, the iPad mini. Now imagine if Apple did come up with an iPad mini Pro, say with an OLED screen, it would definitely pinch on some sales of the bigger iPad Pros with the OLED screens, and it would also pinch some sales on people that would buy the Pro Max phones or the Plus phones. Now that said, there is a target demographic for the iPad mini, and my wife being one of them. To give you a little bit of context, my wife did have the older base iPad 10 generation, which is a little bigger than the mini, and she actually sold that and bought the iPad mini 7 generation, specifically because of the screen. Me, on the other hand, will never buy the iPad mini specifically because of its screen. The screen of the iPad mini can be its biggest strength and its biggest weakness. Let me explain. So my wife is someone who does not like bigger phones like the Pro Maxes or the Plus phones. She uses a 16 Pro. She likes the smaller phones because she does not like to always wield a bigger phone. Yet at the same time, she does like a bigger screen when she's consuming content or she's browsing the web. That's where the iPad mini comes in. When she sold the iPad 10 generation and bought the smaller mini, she ended up using the mini a lot more for consuming content, laying on the couch, browsing the web. So yes, there is a target demographic for this. Now, without making this video too long, how to identify if you do fall into this target demographic? First off, if you're looking for specs on the iPad mini, I won't really harp on them. I'll leave it right here. You can screenshot that. But here's how you know if you fall into the target demographic for the iPad mini. A, you definitely don't like the bigger sizes of the iPad Airs or the iPad Pros. You prefer something small. You also do use a smaller phone. You don't want an unwieldy 16 Pro Max or the 16 Plus phones. So you like a smaller, pocketable screen when you don't need one, but yet at the same time, you prefer a slightly bigger screen for consuming content. B, you don't really mind watching content on non-OLED screens. That richer contrast ratio or that deeper, inkier blacks doesn't really matter to you as long as you have a bigger screen to consume content and browse the web. The biggest one of all, you just don't like the bigger sizes of the iPad Pros and the iPad Airs, and you don't want to spend that much of money on the bigger iPads. Now, surprisingly, the iPad mini is not the cheapest iPad in its lineup. That's the base iPad, the iPad 10 generation. So Apple does know that there are people out there who would pay a premium to get that smaller size because they feel that would be an ideal size to watch content on the go. Oh yes, another point, Apple Pencil. Apple Pencils don't work on any iPhones. So if you are someone who actually has use for the Apple Pencil and the bigger iPads are just too big, then this is your window into that Apple Pencil usage because it is a smaller screen and it does support Apple Pencil. But there are definitely a lot of reasons why you should not buy the iPad mini. And if you feel strongly about any of the following points, then you should look elsewhere. Number one, you really like that rich aspect ratio. And this is something that's a deal breaker for me. You prefer watching content on an OLED screen and you don't like that little washed out blacks, then you gotta look elsewhere. You're all about Face ID and you don't want to go back to Touch ID because yes, the iPad mini does have only Touch ID and it's placed in the power button. So you gotta have to register both your index fingers. I've done something where I've actually registered my palm because I always use it in landscape mode and I found this hack on the internet and it does open up very well. So yeah, no Face ID on this one, just Touch ID. 60 Hz. This does cap out at 60 Hz and again, this is not a deal breaker for me. I don't mind having 60 Hz. I think it's very doable in today's day and age. But if you are someone who does like that smooth scrolling and that 120 FPS, you gotta know that this does cap out at 60 Hz. The other thing is 500 nits of display. Now again, this is not a deal breaker for me because think about it. How often have you watched content or used an iPad out there in the sun? Most of the time, at least for me, I've used the iPad on an aircraft, while traveling, indoors on the couch. So I think 500 nits is sufficiently bright. But if you are someone who wants that all bright display or watches content at a cafe or does work at a cafe, then you got to know that this does cap out at 500 nits. And there's this thing all about the iPad mini online about this jelly scrolling where you kind of scroll in portrait mode and different sides of the screen scroll at a different rate. I have really not noticed this, but it definitely is a thing because there are so many videos about it online. The best way to find out if you do fall into that category of people is just walk into an Apple store or any other store that sells the iPad mini and scroll in portrait mode. If it doesn't affect you, then you do not fall into that category. So let me know, what category do you fall into? Do you prefer the iPad mini where you kind of have that bigger screen whenever you need it and it's not too big to wield around while you have a smaller phone that you use that's more pocketable? or you're someone who would just use a 16 Pro Max or a 15 Pro Max and get that OLED screen to consume content. If you do look at the size difference, yes, the 16 Pro Max is smaller than the iPad mini, but it's not that much smaller. I would rather take that smaller screen size but the deeper blacks. My wife, on the other hand, prefers that bigger screen size, and she doesn't mind that lower contrast ratio. If you are an iPad mini user and you're contemplating whether you should buy the older iPad 6th generation or the iPad 7th generation, just buy the 7th generation, because you may get a better deal on the older one, but this one just has double the storage. It has the A17 Pro, which is a way better chip. It'll kind of future-proof your purchase. And Apple Intelligence, I know it has this big asterisk against it right now, but if it does come out shining in the future, you at least have a product that does support Apple Intelligence, because the older iPad 6th generation does not support Apple Intelligence. So yeah, where do you fall in? Let me know in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, my name is Arnold. I put up a lot of videos on tech. If you do like my content, I would really appreciate if you did subscribe. And that's it from me. Stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.